There was a scorching takedown of Donald Trump on the most recent episode of Real Time with Bill Maher, but surprisingly, it didn't come from Bill Maher or his liberal guest. It actually came from a lifelong conservative, British American commentator Andrew Sullivan, who torched Donald Trump's authoritarian actions over the past several weeks, and we have to talk about it. But before we do, if you end up liking this video and you want to support the channel, please be sure to hit the like, subscribe, and alert bells before you go. All right, friends, you should definitely check out the most recent episode of Real Time with Bill Maher because it has two very interesting guests. You have Ezra Klein of the New York Times, an author of the new book Abundance, who's a pretty liberal commentator. And you have Andrew Sullivan. Andrew Sullivan is a conservative. We've talked about him previously on this channel. He's annoying in certain respects because he's still, I think he does even in this episode too. He appeals way too much to the enlightened centrist tropes and culture war nonsense, which I think also weighs down Bill Maher himself. But I'll give it to him. You know, when he recognizes an abuse of power, he calls it out, even when it's Donald Trump. And in his rant, it even seems to take Bill Maher off guard by how intense Sullivan rightly feels about this. So we're going to play this clip and unpack it together. Here's Andrew Sullivan, a conservative, taking down Donald Trump.
50, that's not horrible.
I have to say, I do not care about the economy if the government in this country claims it can break down anyone's doors, seize anyone with no due process, put them on a plane, and send them to a foreign jail where who knows what's going to happen to them. I want to say the last person in this country who did that was called George III. This is fundamental to this country's survival, to the meaning of this country. We do not let people violate people's security without due process, without law. Period. I know I'm hyped up about this. I know they're not necessarily citizens. I know that some of them, a lot of them, are horrible people that shouldn't be here. But some of them are not. The whole point of this is that innocent people are caught up in this when they should not be, when you are not giving them any chance to prove that they shouldn't be there.
Again, but can
Sorry,
calm down. Jesus Christ.
This is America. I'm an immigrant to this country.
I understand.
That's why I came here, because this country is a country of freedom.
But again,
and he's telling us it isn't.
There you go. A scorching takedown of Donald Trump by a lifelong conservative, a famous commentator. And what's funny is while he was talking, it occurred to me, I remember what Donald Trump happened to say recently regarding his executive power and his ability to do these things and to make deportations and not have to explain them to the courts. I want to pull that. That particular clip up because it's an absolutely stunning thing for Donald Trump to admit. Let me pull it up here. Let's see. Right here. Okay, folks. And this is a reminder of Donald Trump making recent comments from the Oval Office, which basically corroborates everything Andrew Sullivan just claimed.
President, do you think you have the authority, the power to round up people, deport them, and then you're under no obligation to a court to show the evidence against them?
Well, that's what the law says, and that's what our country needs, because we were...
Donald Trump, the sitting president, says, yep, that's what the law says, and it's what the country needs. My ability to unilaterally, without any sort of oversight or judicial review, deport people that I don't like. It's stunning. And it's incredibly authoritarian, and it should unite principled people of any political persuasion. If you're a libertarian, if you're a conservative, if you're a liberal, if you're a progressive, you should, with one voice, unite and say, no, we oppose this in no uncertain terms. And what's interesting is we're seeing an increasing number of libertarian and right-wing institutions and individuals speak out against Donald Trump. One of them is FIRE, and I keep blanking on what this acronym stands for, but they're a libertarian-coded, right-wing-coded free speech organization. Foundation for Individual Rights in Education, FIRE, okay? Well, they're leading the charge against so much of what's going on, so many of the civil rights, free speech, and free press abuses under the Trump administration. So this is from 2 days ago. FIRE and civil liberties groups challenged the unconstitutional retaliation against Mahmoud Khalil. America's founding principle, core to who and what we are as a nation, is that liberty comes not from the benevolent hand of the king, but is an inherent right of every man, woman, and child. That includes, quote, the opportunity for free political discussion as, quote, a basic tenet of our constitutional democracy. And they cite Cox v. Louisiana. And, quote, a function of free speech under our system of government is to invite dispute. It may indeed serve its high purpose when it induces a condition of unrest, creates dissatisfaction with conditions as they are, or even stirs people to anger. Terminelio versus City of Chicago. For these reasons, along with all citizens, quote, freedom of speech and of press is accorded aliens residing in this country, Bridges v. Nixon. Okay, so again, just be very clear, years, decades, centuries of jurisprudence has afforded free speech principles and free speech liberties to legal residents in this country, period. End of. You don't have to simply be a citizen. Mahmoud Khalil was a legal resident. He was a permanent resident of this country as a green card holder. And Donald Trump and Marco Rubio attempted to just unilaterally deport him from the country. They abducted him. They disappeared him. They moved him from New York to Louisiana, hoping for a more favorable jurisdiction. And FIRE has been leading the charge, attacking this. Secretary of State Marco Rubio, however, is attempting to deport a permanent resident, Mahmoud Khalil, not because the government claims he committed a crime or other deportable offense, but for the seemingly sole reason that his expression stirred the Trump administration to anger. The Secretary claims he can deport Mr. Khalil under a Cold War-era statute, giving the Secretary of State the power to deport anyone he, quote, personally determines is contrary to America's, quote, foreign policy interest. And he argues this power extends to even deporting permanent residents for protected speech. It does not. If you actually go to FIRE's website, too, you can find other examples as well, other essays where they, take Trump to task for his various attacks on free speech and free press, including one that we covered the topic of which we covered in a recent video, which is Trump using executive orders to punish law firms whom he views as his political opponents because they either represented people they didn't like or he didn't like, or cooperated with people he didn't like in various legal challenges to him. One of them, in particular, I think it was Paul Weiss and others, they actually bent the knee and agreed to give the Trump administration $40 million worth of pro bono work in exchange for Trump basically taking the boot off their neck. This is stunning. It's unprecedented. No Democrat has ever done this. And yet Trump is ratcheting things up. FIRE is also calling out the FCC's targeting of CBS, the Federal Communications Commission, led by a MAGA culture warrior, Brendan Carr, surgically attacking Donald Trump's political opponents, or people whom he regards as his political opponents in the media. Here's another one too. Matt Makawiak, who is a former, I think, Bush-era Republican. Yes, correct. So he's the president of the Potomac Strategy Group, served in the Bush administration at the U.S. Department of Homeland Security on the Bush-Cheney re-election campaign, and was a senior communications aide to 2 U.S. senators and a governor. And he wrote a principled op-ed objecting to what the FCC is doing. So, there was a time when conservative media views were woefully underrepresented in the media, but all that changed from the late 1980s to the mid-1990s with the rise of talk radio and the establishment of Fox News. Though through these pioneering endeavors, conservative voices carved out a strong position in the American media landscape. Fox remains by far the nation's most popular cable network, and the advent of podcasting has created an explosion of popular new content for conservative audiences. But all of this progress could be under threat because of the decision by Federal Communications Commission Chair Brendan Carr to investigate CBS News for its 60 Minutes interview with Vice President Kamala Harris. So he goes on to say, hey, listen, I understand that, anti-conservative bias exists in the media. We disagree about that. But the unedited video and transcript that were ultimately released by the network from its interview with Vice President Harris proves CBS did none of the splicing or manipulating of content that would traditionally be required for FCC intervention. Yet, Chairman Carr recently opened an investigation into the interview anyway. While some conservatives have expressed support for the move, an assessment of the facts and unintended consequences make clear the end result will not be the victory Republicans are hoping for. I'm no fan of the network given its undeniable history of anti-conservative bias, but as John Adams once said, quote, facts are stubborn things. It's troubling to me that Chairman Carr, a conservative, has opened the door to punishing CBS for exercising editorial discretion under the First Amendment, thereby exposing conservative news outlets in all media to the same sort of attack in the future. So, goes on like this. The next time there's a Democrat in the White House, networks like Fox News and Newsmax, or popular podcasters such as Charlie Kirk, Ben Shapiro, and others, could be subject to similar interrogations about their editorial judgments. Broadcasting licenses may be revoked, content may be taken down, and nonconformity may become a legal liability. Suddenly, the media censorship conservatives have railed against for years will be coming not from liberal outlets, but bureaucrats in Washington at the taxpayers' expense. I respect conservatives' work to root out anti-conservative bias in news coverage, but that will not be done by scapegoating CBS. We will not suddenly see a reversal from the media on their entrenched political views. The FCC attempting to make an example out of CBS will be a major long-term problem for conservative media, masquerading as a short-term victory. Is it worth barreling down such a dangerous path because of one harmless, if poorly edited interview? Conservatives have spent almost 40 years building a successful alternative to left-leaning media establishment. Let's not cripple those foundations and roll back the fundamental right of free speech just for the sake of owning the libs. And that really is all it's about. Brendan Carr is a MAGA culture warrior. He's a contributor to Project 2025. If you actually watch interviews with him or read his interviews, he's very clear. He's a very smart guy, but he is the embodiment of own the libs. And it does create a precedent that Democrats absolutely should use against Republicans simply to teach a lesson, right? This is the whole point. We can't unilaterally disarm. I don't want this because I don't want to call for Democrats to retaliate in this way, but Democrats should retaliate in this way if they ever retake the White House and Brendan Carr continues what he's doing. Both sides, quote unquote, have to put down their proverbial knives. But in this case, the Democrats haven't reached for a knife. Under President Biden, the FCC did not surgically target conservative media. As a matter of fact, President Biden's FCC chair dismissed cases against Fox News, in addition to NBC, CBS, and others as well. She was pretty egalitarian in that respect, pretty fair. Brendan Carr comes in, takes her place, the FCC chair, and he resurrects the cases against the non-Fox networks, but keeps the Fox network complaint buried. Very surgical, very partisan. So this is where we are. We are seeing an increasing number of principled conservatives, and they are few and far between, unfortunately, in the Republican Party, call Donald Trump out. We need to see more of it, and they should join with pro-democracy forces to politically punish Donald Trump and his Republican Party in every election until they stop doing what they're doing in terms of waging an aggressive, censorious war, not just on free speech and free press, but also civil liberties, as Andrew Sullivan complained about. In the meantime, let me know what you think in the comments.